يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك. سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. فلك الحمد حتى ترضى، ولك الحمد قبل الرضا، ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الأولين، وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين، وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين، وصل وسلم على سيدنا محمد حتى ترث الأرض ومن عليها وأنت خير الوارثين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. وبعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. The topic of this lecture is the hadith of Sayyidina Gabriel alayhi salam. The topic of our discussion today, the hadith of Sayyidina Gabriel alayhi salam. The hadith of Angel Gabriel alayhi salam. This hadith, this tradition of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, is a fundamental tradition, fundamental hadith to our religion. It is known amongst the muhaddithin, the scholars of hadith, as al-Hadith or al-Sunnah. Just as Surah Al-Fatiha is known as al-Quran. And just as Surah Al-Fatiha is known as al-Shay is the most important thing. When you say al-Shay in Arabic, it refers not literally the mother of something, the most important thing. So when you say al-Quran, it means that Fatiha is the most important part of the Quran, such that if somebody comes to you and asks you, summarize to me the whole of the Quran, give me an abstract of the whole of the Quran, say Iqra al-Fatiha, read Surah Al-Fatiha. Within that is contained the whole of the Quran, and we get that sense from an understanding of the tartib of the Quran, the sequence of the Quran. When you look at the Quran, the tartib of surah, the sequence, the order of the surahs in the Quran, leaving aside Surah Fatiha, Al-Baqarah, First Surah Al-Quran after Fatiha, Ali Imran, Al-Ma'idah, Al-Nisa. What you notice, the longest surah comes first. Surah Baqarah, the longest surah in the Quran. Then Ali Imran, 200 verses. Then Surah Al-Nisa, less than 200. And it keeps on gradually getting shorter and shorter, until after 1/10 or 1/3 of the Quran's passed, then you drop to the surahs called Al-Mi'un. The surahs that are about 100 ayahs in length when you get towards the last third of the Quran, and it keeps on dropping until you get to the Qisar surah, the shorter surahs of the Quran, which is at the very end of the Quran. If you look at the Quran, there's a gradual drop in the length of the surahs of the Quran, although there are breaks from that. The Surah Fatiha breaks that completely. If we use qiyas in terms of arranging the order of the Quran, if we were to rationally look at it, we'd say Fatiha should be at the very end of the Quran, because it's only 7 verses. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts it at the beginning and names it as Al-Fatiha, Surah Allati Taftah Al-Quran. It's the opener, it opens the Quran. So here the Mufassirin are now going to look, why does it come at the beginning and not where logically you would assume it is at the end of the Quran? Because you say it opens the Quran by giving you a summary of the whole Quran. It's Al-Quran. It's Al-Quran. The whole of the Quran is contained within it. All of the ma'ani of the Quran, all of the meanings of the Quran are contained within Fatiha, which is one of the wisdoms of why 17 times a day minimum you're going to read Surah Fatiha. No other surah, 17 times a day minimum you're going to read Surah Fatiha. Because within that are contained the ma'ani of the Quran. All of the meanings of the Quran are contained within Fatiha. And that's why I've recorded from the Athar, Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. He says, if I was to write a commentary on Al-Fatiha, it would take 70 camels to carry the books. If I was to write a commentary, tafsir of Surah Al-Fatiha, 70 camels. What's that telling you? There's so much within Surah Al-Fatiha. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He tells you to repeat something, does not tell you repeat just for the mere sake of repeating. Quran is not just songs that you read. Quran is the tadabbur, the tafakkur. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Do they not reflect over the Quran? Or are there chains and locks on their hearts? أَمْ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. The Quran is not just to be recited, it's to be understood. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you 17 times a day, bare minimum you need to read Fatiha, there's something in that that needs to be reflected over. The ma'ani of Quran, it's as Ibn Abbas said, عجائبه لا تنقضي عجائبه. The Quran, he said, is a book whose amazing features will never stop. You'll never get bored of reading Quran, but that's if you read it with an open heart, with an open mind, with an open soul, a soul that's been opened to take the futuh of al-Fatiha, to take the openings of Surah al-Fatiha. So Fatiha is Al-Quran. But when we look at Surah, or the hadith of Sayyidina Gabriel alayhi salam, this is known as al-Hadith, al-Hadith, al-Sunnah. The most important hadith is hadith of Sayyidina Gabriel alayhi salam. Why can we say it's so important? And some of the ulama, some of the scholars, famously this hadith comes in the collection of Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah in his al-Arba'in, 40 hadith. And in the introduction to this, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he states that in this collection of 40, he's going to bring together the most significant hadith of the Prophet upon which you can base whole principles, each hadith upon which you can base whole principles. When you look at the Arba'in of Imam Nawawi, these 40 hadith, take any one hadith and you can see an axiomatic principle that underlies it, a principle that's fundamental to the religion. In there, the second hadith, he puts there the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam. Why did he put it second? Because it's the most important hadith. Because the sunnah of the mu'allifeen is you begin with the hadith of niyyah. You always begin with the hadith of intention. And that's why Imam al-Bukhari in his Sahih, very first hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, the hadith of intention. Why? And Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah himself, he says, it's a recommended practice. Anybody who begins a book, writes a book, always begin with the hadith of niyyah. To check your intention, to question yourself, why have I written this? Well, there's an interesting observation that the ulama make on Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah. He begins, some of you inshallah have memorized the hadith. The hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَىٰ فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ لِدُنْيَا يُصِيبُهَا أَوْ امْرَأَةٍ يَنْكِحُهَا فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ. Those who memorize it know that. Imam Bukhari doesn't record it that way. You go and read Bukhari, the very first hadith, although this hadith in Bukhari is repeated 6 times in different places. But at the very beginning he puts a slightly different wording. He has it, and those who memorize it now will pick out what's missing. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَىٰ فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ لِدُنْيَا يُصِيبُهَا أَوْ امْرَأَةٍ يَنْكِحُهَا فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ. What was missing? What was missing? You know the hadith. فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Just translate this hadith. The Prophet said, actions are only judged by intentions. And every person gets what he intended. Your reward is in accordance with your intention. When you sit in a majlis, your reward is in accordance with your intention. When you stand in prayer, your reward is in accordance with your intention, not the act. 10 people, we had about 20 people doing the same act. The reward is not the same. We've all done exactly the same act. The reward is not the same. It's according to your intention. Some people, al-iyadu billah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from this, will go away with nothing. It's possible somebody will go away with absolutely nothing. They've stood there, they prayed, it's possible they'll go away with absolutely nothing. To the point where we said, it may have been better for you not to have come in the first place. Because you didn't do tasheeh and niyyah. You didn't correct your intention. You can have a majlis of muhadara, a lecture. You can have a majlis of Quran. People sit together and read Quran. Some people unfortunately will go away with nothing. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَقَدِمْنَا إِلَى مَا عَلِمُوا مِنْ عَمَلٍ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ هَبَاءً مَنْثُورًا. Nothing is just dust. What they did was, when it comes to the scale, they put it on, it's just particles of dust, have no weight whatsoever. But there are others who will have vast reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the Prophet said, وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَىٰ. Then the actual hadith continues. Whoever's migration is for Allah and His Messenger, his migration is for Allah and His Messenger. And it means that the ajr is lillahi wa rasulih. His niyyah is lillahi wa rasulih. His intention is for Allah and the Messenger, and his reward will be in accordance. But then the hadith finishes, whoever's intention, dunya is for worldly benefits, yusibuha, or for a woman that he wants to marry, he'll leave a country and go to another country, not to go and learn, not to go and practice his religion, not to go and sit at the hands of a righteous person and take from his states and take from his knowledge, not for those reasons. He's just going for some worldly benefit. he's going to get married to a woman out there, his hijrah, you get your dunya. There's no blame in that, you get your dunya. There may well be no blame whatsoever in that, but you're not going to get ajr from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless you make your niyyah in that hijrah lillahi ta'ala. Unless your intent with that is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what did Imam Bukhari miss out? Whoever's intention, whoever's migration is for Allah and His Messenger, his migration is for Allah and His Messenger. He left that out in the first of the 6 times he mentioned it. Why? Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah says, because he was questioning his own intention. He did not consider himself to be from those who did it lillahi wa rasulah. He did not consider himself, he was not a man of arrogance. He was not a man of, he was from the rijal of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's from the men of God. These purified, raised souls who did everything billahi ta'ala. But because he did everything billahi ta'ala, he was questioning everything he was doing. And there's too many Muslims, they do very little lillahi ta'ala, but they think it's all for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who do everything lillahi ta'ala, they question every single act that they're doing. And they're actually convinced it's not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that's why it's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why they get the reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's like saying Umar radhiyallahu anhu, second greatest human being after the prophets, Abu Bakr then Umar. He questions every single thing he does. He's been told by the Prophet on the tongue of the Messenger, he says Abu Bakr fil Jannah, Umar fil Jannah. He's been told he's in Jannah. Well, he goes and questions Sayyidina Hudayfa, am I in that list of the hypocrites that the Prophet told you? You're Umar. You're Umar. The Messenger already told you. He wasn't denying the Messenger. He was absolutely convinced he was in a wretched state. But it was because of that he was raised with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why one of the signs of those people who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that they're convinced they have nothing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When somebody starts thinking he has worth, he has no worth whatsoever with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. من تواضع لله رفعه الله. As the Prophet said, whoever humbles himself, whoever debases himself in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning what? He considers himself to be absolutely nothing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises that person. One of the signs of arrogance, or one of the reasons why people become arrogant, is because they compare themselves to other people. They don't look at themselves in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you compare yourself to somebody else, there's always something you can find better within you than other people. But when you look at you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's nothing left. There's nothing left between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we look at Imam Nawawi, Imam al-Bukhari, a man of absolute purified intention. And when you look at his Sahih, he's a man who memorized 900,000 hadith. But he only keeps about 7,000 within his collection. What did he do? Every single hadith that he writes in his collection, every single hadith, he does a ghusl, he prays Salat al-Istikhara, and then once he's got an answer back, then he'll record it down. 7,000 times he does that. Why? Because he wants it to be lillahi ta'ala. And it has qabul in this ummah. So it was lillahi ta'ala. It's been accepted in this ummah. Therefore it was for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will only leave in this ummah for the slaves, for his slaves, that which was done by the best of his slaves. That which was done by the best of his slaves. So we see Imam Nawawi rahimahullah in his Arba'in begins with the hadith of niyyah to remind you and I that niyyah is the beginning of everything in your religion. Everything in your religion is based upon intention. Then he does a second hadith, which in terms of ma'na, in terms of meaning, is the primary hadith. The hadith Sayyidina Gabriel alayhi salam. Why do we say it's so primary? Some of the ulama, some of our scholars, the scholars of hadith have said, if no hadith was left except for this hadith, you can build the whole of your religion upon this. You want to understand your religion, you can just sit there and study this hadith and you will never stop. You will never stop. You can build the whole of your religion upon this hadith. So it's a principal hadith within Islam. It's from the asas of Islam. It's foundational to Islam. It's a hadith that everybody needs to be acquainted with. And we also find that from the final statement, the Rawi, the narrator, Sayyidina Umar radhiyallahu anhu, said, فَلَبِثْتُ مَلِيًّا, I remained there for a period of time. And then he said, the Prophet asked me, أَتَدْرِي مَنِ السَّائِلُ, do you know who the questioner was? And we'll go over the whole of the hadith. So do you know who the questioner was? He said, Umar says, Allah wa Rasuluhu a'lam, Allah and His Messenger know best. What did the Prophet say? إِنَّهُ جِبْرِيلٌ أَتَاكُمْ يُعَلِّمَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ. Indeed, this is Jibreel who came to teach you your religion. Imam Nawawi, when he comments upon this, says, Deenakum, your religion, means that this is the whole of your religion. There's nothing more to your religion except for what's in this hadith. You want to know what's core to your religion, this is the hadith. And what's also significant when they talk about wurud al-hadith, when was this hadith, when did this incident take place? Say 80 days before the Prophet ﷺ passed away. One of the final statements of the Messenger, and not just one of the final statements, and comprehensive statements, one of the final comprehensive statements of the Prophet ﷺ is this statement, this long hadith. So this hadith is significant. So we're going to look at this hadith now. And we'll look at some of the key points within the hadith. Then inshallah we'll focus on one particular aspect of it, which is ihsan. And we'll look at why we'll focus particularly upon ihsan. The hadith begins, the Rawi Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu arda, he begins by saying that one day we were sat with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In another riwayah that comes in the Sunan of Imam al-Nasa'i, so we sat there, and in that riwayah of Nasa'i, it mentions that the Prophet ﷺ had almost like a platform that was made for them, made out of clay, where strangers who were out of town used to come and sit and speak to the Prophet ﷺ. So he mentions that we sat around the Prophet ﷺ, some of the Sahaba sat around the Prophet ﷺ. إِذْ جَاءَ رَجُلٌ, he says a man comes, رَجُل, a man comes, شَدِيدُ بَيَاضِ الثِّيَابِ شَدِيدُ سَوَادِ الشَّعَرِ, whose hair was jet black, and his thawb, he was wearing a white garment, was shining white, pristine white garment, jet black hair, pristine white garment. لا يعرف منا أحد, none of us knew him. لا يرى عليه أثر السفر ولا يعرف منا أحد. So there was no sign of travel upon him. What's the significance of that? وَلَا يَعْرِفُ مِنَّا أَحَدٍ, and none of us knew him. None of us knew, no sign of travel. The significance of that is that his hair was jet black. He had pristine white clothes on, but he wasn't a traveller. You travel through the desert, you're not going to look like that. You're not going to, on any journey, you're always going to end up slightly dishevelled, slightly, not in a pristine state. But this is somebody who's travelled through the desert. And travelling through the desert, not only is it going to be ragged, it's going to be very dirty, your garment's going to be very dirty, your hair's not going to be immaculate. So Sayyidina Umar is saying now that we knew he was not from Medina. After we knew he was not a traveller, he wasn't out of town. All the signs of Hadari, a city dweller, was upon him. But then at the same time, وَلَا يَعْرِفُ مِنَّا أَحَدٍ, but none of us knew him. None of us knew him. Meaning he's not from Medina, because Medina is a small town. He was not from Medina, but he was not a traveller. So what's now ticking away in the mind of Sayyidina Umar? There's something not right about this person. There's something not right about this person. He doesn't know who he is. He's not a traveller, he's not from town. Generally, Sayyidina Gabriel alayhi salam, when he would come, only Nabiina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ever saw him in his original form. On two occasions. One when he's coming out of Ghari Hira. When he comes out of Ghari Hira, and he says he looks round in all directions, and all he sees is the angel in his original form. Likewise, عند سدرة المنتهى, as mentioned Surah Al-Najm, عند سدرة المنتهى, at the low tree, on Laylat al-Mi'raj, he sees Jibreel alayhi salam in his original form. No other human being has seen him in the original form. From the khasa'is of the Prophet ﷺ, from the unique qualities of the Messenger ﷺ, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed him, gave him the ability to see an angel in its original form. No other human being has that happened to. And there's thabit in the ahadith, that's confirmed in the hadith. But when Jibreel alayhi salam used to come, as a norm, he would take the form of a human being. Like when he comes to Sayyidina Maryam alayhi salam, فَتَمَثَّلَ لَهَا بَشَرًا سَوِيًّا, he appears in the form of a perfect man, Sawiyya, perfect, handsome. And the Malaika from Nur, the angels are created out of light, and they will only take the form of the best of human beings. The best of human beings, which is why Sawiyya, Basharan Sawiyya, the best of human forms they will take, because their nature is angelic. Sayyidina Dihya al-Kalbi radiallahu anhu arda, Sayyidina Dihya radiallahu anhu, he was buried in Damascus. Why Sayyidina Dihya? Because he was one of the most handsome of all the companions. as is mentioned in his biographies. He was one of the most handsome of the companions, such that, like Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, he used to wear a niqab to cover his face, because the intense beauty became a fitna for the women. It became a tribulation. So he would, like Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, would cover his face, as Zulaykha, when she orders him to come out, tells him to uncover. Likewise, Sayyidina Dihya al-Kalbi, he was a man of immense beauty. Gabriel alayhi salam used to appear in his form, ghaliban, as a norm. This instance he didn't. Because if he came in the form of Sayyidina Dihya al-Kalbi, they would have recognized him. Because he was from Medina, but he didn't come in that form. He came in the form of a man that they did not know. So now what's happening in the mind of Sayyidina Umar? He realizes something's not right about this. There's another riwayah to this. There's another riwayah to this hadith. Ibn Abbas interestingly mentions, as this now incident's going to unravel, Ibn Abbas mentions, we could hear a voice but we could not see anyone. We could hear a voice but we could not see anyone. Sayyidina Umar said he saw a man. Sayyidina Ibn Abbas, another companion said we heard a voice but we did not see anyone. Why? Say the hal of Sayyidina, the spiritual state of Sayyidina Umar has got to the point where he can see the unseen. He can see a different realm of existence. Like Sayyidina Maryam alayhi salam, Siddiqa, the highest rank of believer. كانت وأمه صديقة. She was from the highest rank of women, one of the 4 greatest women. She gets to the point where she can see the unseen. And that's thabit, that's confirmed. As Sayyidina al-Harith is sitting in the masjid, he says, كَأَنِّي أَرَىٰ عَرْشَ رَبِّي بَارِزًا. He says, as if I can see the throne of Allah subhanahu in front of me. Likewise, Sayyidina Umar, his state has reached such a point where even an angel in human form he can see. Other Sahaba couldn't see because their state were not at the same state as Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. As Sayyidina Umar said, and this is mentioned by Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah, one time Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, in the Khilafah of Sayyidina Umar, after the Prophet passed away, he's sleeping before Fajr, and he has a dream. In the dream, he sees that he's gone to the masjid, and at the door of the masjid, the Prophet there's a woman with a tray of dates, and she hands the tray of dates to Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. He enters in, and the Prophet is there, and he hands over the tray of dates to the Prophet. The Prophet picks up a date and puts it into the mouth of Sayyidina Ali, and he eats the date. Then he's standing there waiting for a second date, but nothing happens. He wakes up. Here's the Adhan of Fajr. When he wakes up, the riwayah, the narration mentions the taste of the date, the sweetness of the date is still in his mouth. He now goes to the masjid, and the woman standing at the door with the tray of dates, and his dream state is now being played out in a waking state. That same woman's at the door with the tray of dates. This riwayah is mentioned by Imam al-Dhahabi, who Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani says in the science of Asma wa Rijal, he said he's unparalleled in this ummah, one of the greatest in science of biographies. So he mentions that Sayyidina Ali now takes the tray of dates, playing out the same scene that happened in the dream. He goes in and Sayyidina Umar is there, because this is now after the Prophet. And he hands over the dates. Same scene's being played out. Same thing happens. He puts a date into the mouth of Sayyidina Ali, and he chews and eats the date. And he's waiting for the second one. Same thing. He's waiting for the second one. But now he says to Umar, why don't you give me a second date? Umar says what? لو زادك رسول الله لزدناك. Had the messenger of God given you a second one, I would have given you a second one. He's astounded. How can you know what I saw in my dream? How can you know what I saw in my dream? He radiallahu anhu says, and this is a qa'idah now, this is an absolute principle, إِنَّ الْمُؤْمِنِ إِذَا أَخْلَصَ قَلْبَهُ لِلَّهِ بَدَأَ يَنْظُرُ بِنُورِ اللَّهِ. Says the believer, if he makes his heart sincere for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he begins to see with divine lights. The ghaib becomes open to him. Where do we get this from? The prophetic statement, اتَّقِ فِرَاسَةَ الْمُؤْمِنِ فَإِنَّهُ يَنْظُرُ بِنُورِ اللَّهِ. Beware of the inner sight of the believer, because he sees with the light of Allah. That's why we find a man in the time of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu arda, Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik is relating the story. A man walks in, and this man, before he walked in, he looked at a woman, haram man, he looked at a woman, he walks in. Sayyidina Uthman turns to him and says, "You're going to commit zina and come into our presence." He's like, "How did you know?" So Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik says, "Awahyun ba'da Rasulillah." Is there revelation after the Messenger of God? He said, "Did not the Prophet say, ittaqi firasat al-mu'min fa-innahu yanzuru bi-nuril-lah." He says, beware of the insight of the believer because he sees with the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here we have Sayyidina Umar is seeing that which the Sahaba cannot see. That which the Sahaba cannot see, based upon these ahadith that the faqih has just mentioned here. So then what happens? In the riwayah, in the Sunan Imam al-Nasa'i, it begins different. Originally, the riwayah we've already mentioned, there was this mislava, this like platform that the stranger comes and sits on. So Sayyidina Gabriel goes and sits on that platform. And then he says, "Ya Muhammad, adnu." He says, "Oh Muhammad, should I come closer?" He said, "Udnu, come close." So he sits down. But there's still a distance. "Ya Muhammad, adnu." He says, "Oh Muhammad, should I come closer?" He says, "Udnu, come closer." And he keeps on doing it until, as the riwayah in the Arba'in mentions, until his knees were touching his knees. Originally it wasn't that way. Stranger didn't come just on barge and sat in front of the Prophet. He sat adaban ma'a Rasulillah, with etiquette with the Messenger of Allah. And then he asked permission, "Should I come closer? Should I come closer?" Until he said yes. Then he sat in front of him, with his knees touching the knees of the Prophet, and his hands on the thighs of the Prophet. وَوَضَعَ يَدَيْهِ عَلَى فَخِذَيْهِ. They have a difference here. Whose fakhid are they referring to? The riwayah Nasa'i, when he says he placed his hands on his thighs, whose thighs? On his own thighs or on the Prophet's thighs? The riwayah Nasa'i says on the thighs of the Prophet. He placed his hands, he sat with his knees right up to him, and he placed his hands on the thighs of the Prophet. And here there's some masail that we extract. First of all, they say it's not adab with the messenger that we refer to as Ya Muhammad. Nobody refers to the Prophet as Muhammad. You say Ya Rasulullah, say Ya Nabi Allah. That was the adab of the Sahaba. You do not call him by his name. And even after he's passed away, you do not call him by his name. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لا تجعلوا دعاء الرسول بينكم كدعاء بعضكم بعضا. Do not make your dua and your calling of the messenger the same as you call each other. The Mufassirin amongst the Sahaba said, meaning, just as you say Ya Zayd, Ya Amr, don't say Ya Muhammad. Have adab with the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Who are those who call him Muhammad? The Munafiqeen and the A'rab, the Bedouins and the hypocrites, and the Kuffar and the unbelievers. The Sahaba never called him Ya Muhammad. Adaban ma'a Rasulillah. And we say it's an adab with your own parents that you don't address them by their name. And this comes in a hadith, although the hadith is weak, the ma'na is sound, the meaning is sound, which comes in Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah mentioned Kitab al-Adhkar, in his Kitab al-Adhkar, and he has a bab that you do not address your parents by their name. And it comes in the hadith, sarih in the hadith, comes direct in the hadith, do not address your parents by their name. Why? Out of adab with them. So, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam awla bil adab. The Prophet, you should have more adab with the Prophet than your own parents. And it's an urf of the Muslims, it's a norm of the Muslims. You don't call your father by his name. You don't call your father out of etiquette with him. So the Prophet is awla. He's more so, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, An-Nabiyyu awla bil-mu'minina min anfusihim. The Prophet is more, and he's closer to the believers than their own selves. So just as your father, your mother, yourself, the etiquette you display, more etiquette with the Messenger. So here the question is, why then did Jibreel say, Ya Muhammad? Ya Muhammad akhbirni an al-Islam. Ya Muhammad akhbirni an al-Iman. He addresses him by Muhammad. When we say it's not able to do that. Some of the ulama say that the malaika are not within that address. They're not part of that. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, La taj'alu, who's the khitab to? Who's being addressed? Mukallafi. When it says, do not call him, who's that talking to? Mukallafi. Who Who are the mukallaf legally responsible? Humans and jinn. The address is to humanity and to jinn. Angels say taklif li tashri'. They're not part of the address of revelation. They're not part of the address. So some will say that. We say that jawab maybe is not sound. That answer is perhaps not sound, because in other places we see the Sahaba have the utmost etiquette, the angels have the utmost etiquette with the Prophet. We find, for example, Qadi Iyad in his book Shifa, first narration mentions on Layl al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, the night of Isra wal-Mi'raj, when Buraq, the animal comes, and the Prophet is about to climb on him, onto Buraq, what happens? Buraq now starts shaking, sweating. Shaking and sweating. So the Prophet doesn't get on immediately. So Jibreel alayhi salam now addresses Buraq and says, do you behave in such a manner with the Messenger of God? Do you behave in such a manner with the Messenger of God? So there's nobody that's ever been before you who's ever ridden you greater than him. What's that tell you? The angels had adab with the Messenger, such that they're training their animals to have etiquette with the Messenger. So this answer doesn't really hold. To say that they were not part, they were not part of it, but tashrif and they're part of it. Out of sharaf, out of honor, we say they're part of the address of the Quran. And the angels would have the utmost adab, because the father of humanity they had to bow down in front of. The father of humanity they had to bow down in front of, to show what? That you're less in rank than humankind. The greatest angel is lesser than the greatest human beings. Because they're khuddam, they're servants. Jibreel alayhi salam is a servant to the prophets. They come to bring the risalah to the prophets. They're there to serve the prophets. By ijma' of the Muslimin, except for one opinion, that's not even, Imam al-Zamakhshari had an opinion, it's not even considered. The angel Jibreel is lesser than Nabiyyina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we say he would have adab now with the messenger. So why then did he say Ya Muhammad? Others say لِزِيَادَةَ الْإِسْتِغْرَابِ, to increase the gharaba. And they were surprised. It's like Umar is surprised. A complete stranger, out of time, nobody recognizes him. And on top of that, he's addressing him as Muhammad, which confirms what? That's how the Bedouins used to talk about him. He's not a city dweller. So now more confusion in the mind to say that. So perhaps that's the reason why he addressed him as Ya Muhammad, because the level of confusion is now going to increase. But there's a reason why that confusion is there. There's a reason for that. So now we go on to the questions. What are the questions he asks? First question is أخبرني عن الإيمان. أخبرني عن الإسلام. That's in the riwayah Bukhari Muslim. Other riwayat says that he began by أخبرني عن الإيمان. And they say that's probably the sound of the riwayah. Perhaps they say the riwayah Bukhari Muslim was riwayah bil ma'na, and the narrator paraphrased them. They say it's more in line with our understanding that Iman comes before Islam, which comes before Ihsan. So it makes more sense that the original question is Iman. So ask about faith, and then practice, and then spiritual excellence. Because that's the order that it comes in. So the riwayah Bukhari Muslim, where it says Islam, perhaps some of the muhaddithin say that's riwayah bil ma'na, which is something that was normal. The Sahaba, the Tabi'in, the narrators would paraphrase statements, wouldn't relate word for word, they would paraphrase, and maybe that's what's happened here. So really the first question is أخبرني عن الإيمان. Tell me, what is faith? So he says, أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر وتؤمن بالقدر خيره وشره وفي رواية حلوه وبره. So here the first question, tell me about faith. And he tells them the pillars of faith. So that you believe in Allah, you believe in His angels, you believe in His scriptures, revelation, the books, kutubihi, wa rusuli, and His messengers, wal yawm al-akhir, and the last day, wal qadar, wa tu'mina bil qadar. Now here you have a repetition of tu'min. Why? The shurrah, they ask the question, why? So at the beginning, tu'min, you believe in Allah, and then you list them out, but then at the end it repeats, and you believe. Why? Why particularly when it talks about decree? لزيادة الاهتمام بالإيمان بالقدر. You need to pay more attention to belief in decree. Why? Because something that you can easily be led astray on. As Imam al-Tahawi in his text on Aqeedah says, he says, وَالْقَدَرُ والقدر سر الله تعالى في خلقه لا يطلع عليه ملك مقرب ولا نبي مرسل. The secret of decree is the secret of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No prophet, no angel, Nabiyyina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The root of what is free will and what is decree and what is destiny. It says nobody knows that. And because of that, you may start by trying to delve in, trying to deal with it, and fall astray. Ihtimam, ziyadat al-ihtimam. To increase your, and pay attention and have absolute iman bil qadr. Whatever good, bad, hul, mur, the sweet of it, the bitter of it, it's all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the same as when you read the ayah in the Quran, when it talks about mu'minun. What's the description of believers? الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ وَمَا أُنزِلَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ وَبِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ يُوقِنُونَ. It changes يُوقِنُونَ. Before it was يُؤْمِنُونَ. When it described mu'minun, muttaqeen, when it described muttaqeen, the believers, what did it say? You believe in ghaib, in the unseen. They pray, they pay zakah, they believe bima unzila ilayka, the revelation of Quran that's come to you, وَمَا أُنزِلَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ, the revelation before, وَبِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ يُوقِنُونَ. يُوقِنُونَ بِزِيَادَةِ الْإِهْتِمَامِ بِالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. Why does it change from iman to yaqeen? Why does it say believe but now say certainty? Because it's easy not to accept Yawm al-Akhir, because it's not there in front of you. Quran is there in front of you. We have the remnants, legacy of the Messenger. But Yawm al-Akhir is something that's ba'eed, it's distant. It's very easy to neglect it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, yuqimu. It changes now. Lil-ihtimam. Pay more attention with your belief in the next world. Likewise in this hadith, it increases the significance now when it comes to qadr, and we'll touch upon that. Then what's the answer comes? Sadaqta. You're right. Sadaqta, you're right. That now just increases Sayyidina Umar his confusion. Fa'ajibd. He says, now I'm amazed. He asked the question and he says, you're right. That's not, now he's understanding. Because normally the Sa'il is the Talib, he's the one who's asking the question. You're not going to go to Shaykh and say, what's this masala? Is this halal or haram? Do I need to repeat? And he gives you an answer and says, you're right. Shaykh, you're right. You're not going to do that. Because you're sad, you're talib, you're asking the question. If you do, you're arrogant. You shouldn't have been asking in the first place when you knew the answer. So now when Jibreel asks the question and then confirms the answer, there's definitely something strange now in the mind of Sayyidina Umar. So he's got a lot of hayra in his mind, he's got a lot of confusion in his mind about what's being played out in front of him. So now we look at the iman billahi ta'ala. What does it mean you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It means you believe أنه واحد في ذاته في صفاته في أفعاله لا شريك له. What's it mean? It means that you believe He's one subhanahu wa ta'ala في ذاته, in His essence. He has no partners in His essence. There's no second God. Likewise, He's one in His صفات. All of the صفات of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala في قدرته في إرادته في رحمته في غضبه. Every single attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His power, in His ability to hear, to see all things, His knowledge, in the fact that He's al-Baqi, that He will always will be. He's al-Awwal, laysa qablahu shay, al-Akhir, laysa ba'dahu shay. He's the first before which there's nothing, He's the last after which there's nothing. He's wahid fil kull. And everything about Him, nobody shares those qualities. Nobody shares those qualities. And when we share qualities, say fil ism la fil musamma. الاسم لا في المسمى. When we share, and you say, He's Ar-Rahim, you are Rahim. Yeah? We just share the name, nothing else. We share the name, nothing else. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Rahim, He's honoured us by allowing us to take the name Rahim, so we can have musharaka in the ism, not in the musamma. Not in the musamma. He does not share any partners in it. His rahmah is absolute. Our rahmah is qasira. His mercy is absolute. No beginning, no end, no deficiency, no flaws. Our mercy has a beginning, has an end, has deficiency, has flaws. And that's why Imam al-Tahawi in his Aqeedah said, وَاللَّهُ يَغْضِبُ وَيَرْضَى لَا كَأَحَدٍ مِنَ الْوَرَى. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows wrath and He shows pleasure, but not like anybody in creation. Any description, any attributes that He shares with us, mercy that He's allowed us to take in. It's His mercy towards us, and it's takreem wa tashrifan lana. It's to honour us, to ennoble us that He's allowed us to share the name. Nothing more than that. We are not partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any of His attributes. In any of His attributes. Likewise in His af'al. Nobody does any act in existence except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. You did not throw when you threw, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who threw. You did not do anything. Allahu khaliq al-af'al. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the belief of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, of the Orthodox Muslim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates acts. You do not create anything. You're just a sabab zahiri. Al-musabbib huwa Allah ta'ala. Behind everything is the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you do something, it's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed you to do it. وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَنْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. You can only do something because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed it. You had the choice, you have kasam. You have a choice to do it. But once you made the choice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will manifest it through His power, not through your power. You have no hawl, you have no quwwa illa billah. You have no power to do anything. That's our iman billah ta'ala. Then we have iman bil malaika. We believe that they are ibad al-mukramun. They are honored slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لا يعصون الله فيما أمرهم. They do not disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in anything that He orders them to do. لا يعصون الله فيما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. There's no disobedience whatsoever from the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are creatures of God who have been created to do the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have no say whatsoever. We believe in the books of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, particularly the final revelation, the Quran, which we believe is revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's mahfuz ila yawm al-qiyamah. No tabdeel, no tahrif, no alteration, no change will ever come into it. And the mu'min has to believe in every single last word in the Quran. Every single last word, no rejection of anything. Rejection of anything in the Quran is kufr billahi ta'ala wa kufr bi rasulihi. Rejecting anything in the Quran, down to the last word. If you say, for example, as some insane Muslims, alleged Muslims have said, Qul was addressed to the Prophet, and we don't say Qul. We say Hu Allah. That's kufr billahi ta'ala. Not a single word can you reject of the Quran. Because it all came to the Prophet from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala via Angel Jibreel alayhi salam, and we've received it bit-tawatur, through multiple chains. 23 or 24 of the Sahaba memorized the whole of the Quran. And every single generation increased. Every single generation, is rationally impossible that any error could have crept into the Quran. Why? Because the sheer number of people have memorized it. The sheer number of people have memorized it. What's the difference between the Quran and the Bible, the Old Testament, New Testament? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بِمَا اسْتُحْفِظُوا مِنْ كِتَابِ اللَّهِ وَكَانُوا عَلَيْهِ شُهَدَاءَ. That the rabbis and the priests were required to preserve it. They failed to do it because they're human beings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about the Quran, وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. That He took it upon Himself to preserve it. As opposed to previous scriptures, which came down in original form, He did not guarantee that it would be preserved. He left it to the rabbis. And they changed it. They altered it. They altered and changed it. And we know that because of the final revelation that we have. An observation here now, when a Muslim gets into a discussion with a non-Muslim in da'wah ila Allah ta'ala, how do you prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And how do you prove the finality of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? The Quran begins with the proof. Obviously the ultimate proof is what the Quran. Some non-Muslim comes to say, prove that God exists. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اعْبُدُوا رَبَّكُمْ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ مَهْدًا. أيوة. What comes after that? وَالَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ مَهْدًا. فراشا والسماء بناء. الذي جعل لكم الأرض فراشا والسماء بناء وأنزل لكم من السماء ماء من الثمرات رزقا لكم فلا تجعلوا لله أندادا إن كنتم تعلمون. In these ayat here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, worship your Lord. Why? He created you. He created those who came before you. He created the earth as a place for you to reside. He created the heavens above you, the sky above you. He created the heavens above you, and He sent down rizq from the heavens. What's that telling you? What's the proof of God Almighty? Creation itself. Look at creation, reflect over creation. In that is the ultimate proof of God Almighty. You can say they don't accept. That's a hijab bainahum wa bain Allah. And you can say that I can go to an atheist and I tell them, look at creation. And when they look, they're more convinced it's by chance. That's hijab. That's veils. Like somebody came to the faqih one time and said, I've tried to explain to this atheist and he won't accept. I've told him to look at creation. So the messengers came and they gave proofs and they still rejected. What do you expect? Your duty is not to convert people. Your duty is to give a message. Your duty, people in da'wah will say, I'm going to go and convert me. Say, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala converts you, don't convert anybody. إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. You do not convert who you want. If it was in the control of human beings to convert, the Prophet would have converted Abu Talib. But this ayah comes out and says, you can't convert whoever you want. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. That's not your job to convert. Your job is to give the risala. If they accept or reject, that's their business. That's the business of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not your business. There will be prophets on Yawm al-Qiyamah who will be resurrected with no followers behind them. No followers whatsoever. There will be prophets with no followers whatsoever Yawm al-Qiyamah. This ummah will have the greatest number of followers. Then the ummah of Musa alayhi salam. Then other ummahs will be fewer and fewer. Until you come to some prophets, no followers whatsoever. Somebody says, we've been doing da'wah 10 years and nobody's accepted the message. So your job is to do da'wah, not to convert. Your job is not to convert. Your job is to do da'wah. Nuh alayhi salam did not complain 950 years. How many accepted Nuh alayhi salam? The 950 years, less than 100 people. How many went on the ark? Less than 100 people. If Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam can't convert people, don't worry about it, you just give a message. So when the atheist comes and says, that's not a proof for me, that's baynaka wa bayn Allah. Between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we lead you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I've given the message. I've conveyed the message. And that's why the Prophet and the final sermon, what did he say? Hal ballaght. Have I conveyed the message? That was his only concern. Have I conveyed the message? The da'i is concerned, have you conveyed the message? That's the proof of the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's the proof now of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِّثْلِهِ. The Quran brings a proof. Some unbeliever comes and says, you say Muhammad is the final messenger. Prove it. Say, produce a Quran like what he produced. That's the proof that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in the Quran. Like you want to have a discussion now with a non-Muslim? The proof in the Quran is engaging at the level of the Quran. This is An-Nabi al-Ummi. This is An-Nabi al-Ummi. This is the oral prophet who is stripped away from the ability to read or write, but no access to normal tools of education. And he brings a book that decapitated, disabled the claims of those poets and those udaba amongst the Arabs. They couldn't do anything. Now you want to say he's made it up? Bring something like it. Bring something like it. Originally, what's the challenge in the Quran? قل لئن اجتمعت الإنس والجن على أن يأتوا بمثل هذا القرآن لا يأتون بمثل هذا القرآن. The first challenge, bring the Quran like the Quran. Can't do it. Surah Hud now drops down. أم يقولون افتراه قل فأتوا بعشر سور مثله مفتريات. Second challenge, you can't match the challenge of the whole Quran. We'll make it easy for you now. 10 surahs. Bring 10 surahs. طيب. Next challenge, you can't do that. What's the last challenge now? فأتوا بسورة من مثله. Bring one surah. The ulama of Quran says surah is nakira, it's indefinite. أقصر سورة في القرآن. We're not asking you for Surah Baqarah. Bring something like إِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرَ. Now somebody said, I can write a few lines. Now we say with the ma'ani that's contained. Produce the language of Surah, the language that's within there. Any Arab reads Surah, any Arab reads the Quran will know that this is not Kalam al-Bashar. Like when you have a discussion with an Arab, even Afsah al-Arab, the most eloquent of the Arabs, when you come to the Quran, you realize this is not Kalam al-Bashar. Even when you hear the Hadith of Prophet, that's Kalam al-Bashar. When you come to the Quran now, it's different. Utbah ibn Rabi'ah comes to the Prophet in Mecca, and he tells the Ru'asa al-Quraysh, he tells the leader of the unbelievers, he says, let me go and deal with him. He tells the leader, so let me go and deal with him. So he goes and talks. Utbah, the Prophet in Mecca, goes and talks. And he talks and talks and talks to the Prophet. And he speaks for a long time. And the Prophet, he's a man of etiquette. The Prophet is a man of ultimate etiquette. He lets him speak. Even though these are his enemies, he lets him speak his book. At the end he said, have you finished? He says, yes. What's the Prophet then do? Reads the ayat of the Quran, Hamim, Tanzeelun min ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And then he reads from the beginning of Surah Hamim Sajda. And Utbah's listening. Until he gets to the ayah, فَإِنْ أَعْرَضُوا فَقُلْ أَنذَرْتُكُمْ صَاعِقَةً مِثْلَ صَاعِقَةِ عَادٍ وَثَمُودَ. At that point he says, stop. Now he's scared now. Because when it comes to this point he says, tell them. فَإِنْ أَعْرَضُوا, if they turn away, tell them. I warned them of صَاعِقَةً, and a sound, almost like a sound from heaven that will come down. مِثْلَ صَاعِقَةِ عَادٍ وَثَمُودَ. The same that destroyed Ad and Thamud. He's not frightened at that point. And he goes back to them and said, this is not human speech. He said, I've heard the greatest of poets. And this is Utbah from the greats. And these were Arabs who knew their language. This is not like Arabs nowadays. This was As-Sah al-Arab. Those were people who knew. When you go and speak, even the best Arabic now does not come anywhere near the Arabic, the least Arabic that they would speak. Even the best of our, and all those who are Arabs, you can testify to that. The greatest Arabic now comes nowhere near the least of what they spoke. And it's as if you're speaking a completely different language. If you went and spoke prophetic Arabic now to an Arab, Ameen, Ameen, Ameen. It's as if you're reading Quran to him. It's a completely different language. But even that language, I say, Utbah, he recognizes that this is not human speech. What's their response? He's bewitched you like he's bewitched everybody else. Whenever they come, he comes with something that decapitates their claim. What do they say? They said to him, split the moon. He splits the moon. What do they say? Sihrun mustamir. Just magic that keeps on happening. Continuous magic. So even if you were to show them Quran and show them proofs, the fact that they accept or not is not in your hands. It's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who accepts and who does not accept. And then it says, Al-Iman bil-Yawm al-Akhir, or Al-Iman bil-Rusul, and Rusul includes the Anbiya, includes every single prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The least prophet to the greatest prophet, and the greatest prophet being Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And amongst them is Ulul Azmi min al-Rusul, the 5 greatest prophets. And you also have the Rusul and you have the Anbiya. That's all of them. You have the prophets. Then amongst the prophets there are some who are given a message to convey, a risala, a sharia to convey, a law to convey. And then amongst them, those are some of them who are known as Ulul Azmi, the prophets who are greatest resolve amongst them. These were 5 in number. Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, above all of them. Sayyidina Ibrahim, Sayyidina Musa, Sayyidina Nuh, and Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. The 5 greatest prophets. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاصْبِرْ كَمَا صَبَرَ أُولُو الْعَزْمِ مِنَ الرُّسُلِ. These 5 prophets were the ones who faced the greatest difficulty. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَاصْبِرْ. And when you face tribulation in your life, reflect over what Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam felt. Reflect what Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam felt. You're out in da'wah and you're getting a bit of grief from some people. So have your people driven you out of your town? Have your people stoned you to the point where you're flowing in blood like the Prophet came out of Taif? Have your people tried to crucify you? They tried to crucify Isa alayhi salam. They killed Zakaria alayhi salam. They killed Yahya alayhi salam. What have you faced? Nothing. A bit of grief comes our way and we start shaking. Fasbir kama sabara ulul azmi min ar-rusul. Like they start insulting you. So what did they call your messenger? Who's far greater than you? They called him Sahir, they called him Kahir, they called him Majnun. What did they call your messenger? You've had nothing yet. You've had nothing. Always remember that any musibah you face, the Prophet faced greater than it. Any tribulation you face in your life, your messenger faced greater than that. There's nothing you've ever suffered in your life similar to what your messenger suffered. Our belief in the prophets is that they all came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our belief in the prophets is that it's a maqam al-risala wa al-nubuwa ghayr muktasab. It's not something you acquire. As one of them, as Imam al-Laqani in his text in Aqidah, he said, وَلَمْ تَكُنِ النُّبُوَّةُ مُكْتَسَبًا وَلَوْ رَقَى فِي الْخَيْرِ أَعْلَى دَرَجًا بَلْ ذَاكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ جَلَّ اللَّهُ وَاهِبُ الْمِنَنِ. He said, Nubuwwah, prophecy, is not a rank that is acquired. You cannot go through spiritual increase to the point where you say, I receive revelation. You do that, it's kufr. Any Muslim, and there were Muslims who claim that they reach a level of prophecy, any Muslim who claims that rank, kufr billah ta'ala. Allahu a'lam wa haythu yaj'alu risalata. God knows best where to place his risala. So he says, وَلَوْ رَقَى فِي الْخَيْرِ أَعْلَى دَرَجَةٍ. Even if he rises spiritually to the highest of level, بَلْ ذَاكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ. So that's the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which he gives to whomsoever he wants. And then we also believe that the least prophet is greater than the greatest human being after him. The least prophet is greater than the greatest human being after him. The greatest human being after the prophets as a whole is Sayyidina Abu Bakr al-Umar. Say whoever, and we don't know who it is, we don't know who the least prophet is, so whoever it may be, he's greater than Abu Bakr al-Umar. He's greater than Abu Bakr al-Umar. And it's considered to be zandaqa, it's considered to be heresy to claim that a wali, a saint, a sahabi is greater than a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hasha. Impossible. As a rank it's impossible. You can never rise to the rank of prophecy. No human being after prophets can rise to that rank. And that's the dalal of some of the Sufiyyah. Some of those who claim the spiritual path went astray when they claimed that wali can rise above the rank of a prophet. Likewise, and a point that's worth noting that comes in the Quran which can be misunderstood about the prophets. It says in a few places in the Quran, لا نفرق بين أحد من الرسل. We do not distinguish between any of the prophets. So no, we do distinguish. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the greatest. We do not say Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the same as Sayyidina Yunus alayhi salam. But he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, do not place me on the same as Sayyidina Yunus alayhi salam. What's he mean by that? So do not denigrate Sayyidina Yunus alayhi salam. Do not don't do tanqis of any prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't lower the rank of any prophet. And we say there's fadl between, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that. We have no ta'arud bayn al-ayat. We have no an apparent contradiction between ayat. We have to do jama' of the ta'arud. We have to now reconcile. It says, لا نفرق بين أحد من الرسل. We do not distinguish between any prophet. But at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تلك الرسل فضلنا بعضهم على بعض ورفعنا بعضهم درجات. It says, these are prophets. فضلنا بعضهم على بعض. We've raised some of them above others. So now we're going to have to reconcile it. There's no contradiction in Quran or in Sunnah. Wahy is all from the same source. There's no contradiction. So how do we reconcile? And this ayah continues, وَرَفَعْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ. Mufassirin says, يعني أحدهم وهو سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم درجات. And we've raised one of them in degrees over all of the rest of them, who is Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم. So how do we reconcile? Simple. The Quran, it tells us what does it mean, لا نفرق. Surah Al-Nisa, إن الذين كفروا بالله ورسله ويريدون أن يفرقوا بين الله ورسله ويقولون نؤمن ببعض ونكفر ببعض أولئك هم الكافرون حقا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what does لا نفرق mean? نؤمن ببعض ونكفر ببعض. We do not distinguish by saying we believe in some prophets and we reject other prophets. If you reject any prophet, you've rejected all of the prophets. If you say, I believe in Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but I do not believe in Isa alayhi salam, so you've rejected Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? What's the dalil of that? Mufassirin say, Surah Al-Shu'ara, كذبت رسله. There's an ayah, it doesn't come to mind. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the people of Noah rejected their prophets. Jama' rusulahu. But there's only one prophet that was sent, Sayyidina Noah alayhi salam. The Mufassirin say, why then does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say rusul to the people of Noah when there's only one rasul that came to them? So because when you reject Noah, you rejected all of the prophets. Rejection of one prophet means you rejected all the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then it says that we believe in Yawm al-Akhir. And then it says that we believe in Qadr, khayrihi wa sharrihi min Allah ta'ala. That we believe in whatever is decreed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have kasb, bima kasabat aydikum. You're held accountable for what you choose to do. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's the extent of your free will, that He's given you choice. But then there's a lot of things that affect that. And in Aqeedah, in books of Tawheed, they will discuss this. Ultimately, we say that everything is in the ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing escapes the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you have a choice in your actions. Then Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam asked the question. The answer he gives you, the pillars of faith, that you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you believe أن تشهد لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله وتقيم الصلاة وتؤتي الزكاة وتصوم رمضان. في بعض الروايات تصوم رمضان وتحج البيت إن استطاع إليه سبيل. He mentions that the obligations, that you pray, you fast, you give zakat, you do hajj if you're able to do so. What's iman? When he says أخبرني عن الإيمان, what's that? It's your tawheed, it's what you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what أخبرني عن الإيمان. That's the beginning point of your faith. You have no Islam if you have no iman. You can say you can worship all you like. If you do not believe correctly, your worship means absolute nothing. And that's why we say كلمة لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله saves you from eternity in hellfire. You can and one of the dalal now amongst Muslims, one of the misguidance of Muslims, أعوذ بالله, and Muslims need to be made aware of this in Iman. We do not say that all paths are equal to God Almighty. This idea of wahdat al-adyan, it's crept now amongst Muslims. Anybody who believes that has rejected Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You cannot be considered to be a Muslim. This is an idea that's existed historically amongst Muslims. It's gained currency now. It's gained currency that Jew, Christian, all enter into Jannah. And some of them will use the ayah in the Quran, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ هَادُوا وَالصَّابِئُونَ وَالنَّصَارَى مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا فَلَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Some of them will twist this ayah and say it applies. It means a Jew who dies, a Jew will enter into Jannah. The Christian dies, the Christian enters Jannah. And the literal meaning of this seems to back that up. Those who believe, the Jews, the Christians, the Sabians, those who believe in Allah on the last day and do good deeds will have the reward with the Lord. They will not fear nor will they grieve. Ibn Kathir rahimahullah in his tafsir explains this. Because now we've got other ayat and we have to always understand the Quran contextually. You can't just take one ayah randomly and base your whole deen upon it. You've got to look at the whole Quran. The Quran explains it. The first principle in tafsir bil-ma'thur, the mufassirin use, fassir al-Quran bil-Quran. The Quran, you look at other ayat of Quran and you understand. مثلا صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم من هؤلاء الذين أنعمت عليهم أولئك الذين أنعم الله عليهم من النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين. Who are the ones, the path of those that you bestowed your favor upon? Who are these people? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains in Surah Nisa. الصديقين والشهداء والصالحين والأنبياء والصالحين explains in Surah Nisa. So you want to come and give all these explanations? So we've already got the explanation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now here we need to look at other ayat. When it says إن الدين عند الله الإسلام, when it says ومن يبتغي غير الإسلام دينا فلن يقبل منه وهو في الآخرة من الخاسرين, that the only religion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Islam. Whoever seeks the faith within Islam will never be accepted from him. The hadith in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said, أي يهودي أو نصراني سمع بي ولم يؤمن بي فالنار أولى به أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. Any Jew or Christian who hears about me and does not believe in me, hellfire is his place. And Imam Nawawi rahimahullah in his Sharh in Sahih Muslim, when he explains it, he says this is a belief that is an ijma' of the Muslims upon. He says anybody who rejects this belief himself has fallen out of the fold of Islam. It's not just that he's not a Jew or a Christian. He himself says it's okay to be a Jew or a Christian. So what was the point then of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam coming? Why did he go through all of this trouble? Why did he suffer 23 years in da'wah if it didn't really matter? It matters. It matters. So what Ibn Kathir then says, that ayah, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالنَّبِي مُحَمَّدٍ صلى الله عليه وسلم وَالَّذِينَ هَادُوا فِي زَمَنِ مُوسَى عليه السلام وَالنَّصَارَى فِي زَمَنِ الْمَسِيحِ. Those who believe in Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, the Jews in the times of Musa عليه السلام, the Christians in the time of Isa عليه السلام. That's contextual, that's not an absolute ayah. That has to be understood in its context. So we say, the beginning point, if you want to have Islam and you want to have Ihsan, you must have Iman. As somebody says that person's, the faqir in Manchester, we gave a dars, and this point came out. And it's very important that people discuss this point, because too many people are getting affected. Somebody said, what about the Pope, and what about Mother Teresa, and what about the good Christian neighbour? I said, there's no goodness if you don't accept Allah and the Messenger. All of your a'mal, alhamdulillah, Allahi was khayr. But you rejected the one who gave you all khayr. And you rejected the one who came to you with all the khayr of this dunya and the akhirah. So what's the benefit of doing all of that? What's the faida? Except for in the dunya, your benefit will be in this world. So but that person spent their whole life doing good deeds, but they rejected the one who created them. See, that's not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deals with them based upon His adl, based upon His justice. You do all the good, but you rejected the one who gave you everything. There's no good in anything that you've done. So then the Prophet was asked the question, أخبرني عن الإحسان. Tell me about ihsan, which is what we were meant to be speaking about. We haven't had the chance to speak about that. Inshallah there's been some fawaid, hopefully there's been some benefit. But ihsan, and here just a point to mention. First of all, what did the Prophet answer? He said, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. Worship Allah subhanahu as if you see Him. Sayyidina Ali was asked the question, هل رأيت ربك? Have you seen your Lord? And remember this, the belief of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is that you will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the akhirah. Not in this world, in the akhirah. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, says, Rabbi arini anzur ilayka. My Lord, allow me to see you. Lan tarani. Yani fi dunya. You will not be able to see me in this world. No. But in the akhirah, yes. Wujuhun yawma idhin nadhira ila rabbiha nadhira. Faces on that day will be beaming as they look at their Lord. Al-kayf bila kayf wa la al-hisar, as Imam al-Qaqqani said. We don't know how that's going to happen. We don't know how that's going to happen. But we believe it happens because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it. And the Prophet said, إِنَّكُمْ سَتَرَوْنَ رَبَّكُمْ. So indeed you will see your Lord as you see al-Badr, as you see the full moon on a clear night. So you will see your Lord, but in this world you cannot see Him. In a waking state you cannot see Him. So Sayyidina Ali has asked the question, هَلْ رَأَيْتَ رَبَّكَ? Have you seen your Lord? He says, وَكَيْفَ أَعْبُدُ مَا لَا أَرَى? How can I worship the one that I see? How have you worshipped your Lord? His answer is not with the eyes, with the heart. With the heart. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is never absent from your heart. You have what they call wahdat al-shuhud. Everything you see is being from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything, every action, every ni'mah, every favour, every rahmah that He sends, you see from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see it being from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see when the rain comes down, you see that this is from your Lord. You see this is from your Lord. Son of the Prophet, when the rain used to come down, he would take off his top and expose himself to the rain. He said, this is newly come down from my Lord. What's he seeing now? He's not seeing Sabbath, he's seeing Al-Musaddib. He's not seeing the rain, because he's seeing the one who sent down the rain. And in the Faqih, we were in Damascus, 2008 it was, and there was a drought for many years. No rain had come down for a long time. And everybody's doing dua and istisqa and so on. And then in that winter, snow came down for the first time in 10 years. And people were rejoicing. People hadn't seen snow in 10 years. People were rejoicing. And I always remember an amazing khutbah from one of the mashayikh did. Amazing words that he said. He said, لا تفرح بالنعمة وافرح بالمنعم. لا تفرح بالنعمة. So do not rejoice in the favor, rejoice in the one who granted you the favor. لا تفرح بالنعمة وافرح بالمنعم. When you begin to see everything coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's when you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you can see Him. Because the eyes can't see your Lord, but your heart can see your Lord. And that's what you want. You see now, you have a structure of your religion. Your religion is based upon Iman, the foundation to save you from eternity and hellfire. You must have belief in these principles. And then the boundaries of the wall, Buni al-Islam ala khams, the Prophet gave tashbih, he compared it to a building. What's the foundations of that building? These arkan al-Islam, the pillars of Islam. The building, the wall, and the wall is built by halal and haram, knowing the boundaries of Sharia. You cannot claim to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you do not abide by the hukm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every matter. But then we say, Sharia is not enough. Sharia is not enough. You've got to taste ihsan within your ibadah. You've got to excel in your worship. You've got to reach the point. We don't want mechanical worship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has got the angels to do that. The human being is not to go through routines. The angels do that. The human being is to elevate and raise yourself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created human beings between two extremes. You have al-halat al-malakiyya and al-halat al-bahimiyya. You have the angelic realm and the animalistic realm. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Fi ahsan taqweem, thumma radadnahu asfala safilin." Created you in the best of form. The best of form was Adam alayhi salam. He got the angels to bow down. You're greater than angels, because your Father is greater than angels, and all the angels recognize that by bowing down in front of the Father, that was Adam alayhi salam. But if you reject Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, turn away from Him, أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ إِنْهُمْ إِلَّا كَالْأَنْعَامِ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ سَبِيلًا. Are we worse than animals? And when you see human beings rebel against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, drinking and fornicating and lying and doing all time, say animals don't do that. Animals don't do that. Animals were created to do a function and they do it, they don't rebel. You were created to know your Lord. You were created to worship your Lord. You were created to have ma'rifah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You were not created to rebel. If you do rebel, animals are better than you. Animals are better than you because the animal never rebels against its Lord. The human being fluctuates between states. When you're in a state of ta'ah, obedience, angels come and surround you. We're now in a majlis with the angels because we're doing ta'ah. The angels recognize the nature of these gatherings. Ta'ah is something that attracts angels. Acts of obedience attracts angels because angels now see somebody who can potentially become like an animal rising to be greater than angels. But if you're in a state of rebellion against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you drive away the angels. The fasiq, the kafir, is a cause of repelling the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because what does that remind them? Shaitan. The original one who rebelled against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So our states fluctuate. And what we need to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-afiyah. Al-afiyah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for afiyah. Afiyah is well-being in everything. Not just physical well-being, spiritual well-being. That just as you've given us physical well-being, allow our souls to taste from that realm. Because ar-ruha min amri rabbi. When we talk about ihsan and ibadah and worship, so what are we feeding? Not the man, that's iman. What are we feeding? We're feeding our soul. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. So you need to feed your soul. And remember, your soul is a prisoner that's caged in your physical body. This body is from the earth. مِنْهَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ. We created you from it. وَفِيهَا نُعِيدُكُمْ. And we're going to return you back to it. The food of this body is from the earth. Because the body came from the earth. The soul passes through and is caged as a prisoner inside of this. You're the warden over that soul. You've got the keys now to open it, to give it connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Through ibadah, through ta'ah, dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Qur'an, a'mal al-khayr. That's where you're feeding it. If you refuse to do these acts, you're torturing that prisoner that's within your cage. You're torturing that prisoner. That's what ihsan is about. Ihsan, which is the ultimate in the relation of a believer. Remember, it's not enough. Iman is the beginning point, but that's not enough. Now we need a'mal, that's Islam, but that's not enough. Then we need ihsan. Ihsan is the roof to that structure. And the rest of your life is not just about knowing your belief. Belief is something in the space of 1 hour you can learn what you're required to believe. Halal and haram, quick time you can do a course learning what's fard and what's wajib, what's sunnah, quickly you can learn. But what's the difficult thing? Mujahada ala nafs. Because the Prophet struggling against yourself. Like you stand in prayer now, as we mentioned before, perhaps that prayer is not being accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What determines it? The state where your nafs was. Did you have hudur in your salah? Were you with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your salah? That's what determines qabul al-a'mal. Not the zahir of it. The zahir of it is qabul and al-mufti. When you go to Mufti and say the prayer this way, say, MashaAllah, your prayer is good. Is it accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He can't tell you that. And you will never know until Yawm al-Qiyamah. That inner state is the most important. The other two are foundational. The inner state is what gains qabul with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why the responsibility is to work on the insan. Not to be satisfied that you're doing a'mal al-khayr. That you purify yourself. The Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came, yuzakkihim. يعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة. He came يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم. He came to, amongst his functions, teach them, educate them, recite the Quran to them. But amongst his functions, يزكيهم, that he came to purify them. He purified the Sahaba in the best of manner. They purified their students in the best of manner. We need to purify our souls. We need to purify our souls until what? When the angel of death comes, the angel of death will say, يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية. That's the state. When does that happen? Not because you've been praying, but because your soul has been purified. نفس راضية بالله اللهم مرضية بها. That's what we want. A soul that is happy to meet its Lord, and its Lord is happy to meet that soul. That's a purified soul. But remember, the worst enemy that you have is not shaitan. It's not shaitan. It's your nafs. We always blame shaitan. Prophet ﷺ said, أَعْدَ الْأَعَادِ الَّذِي بَيْنَ جَنْبَيْ. Your worst enemy is that which is between your two sides, yourself. Shaitan suggests, waswasa. He doesn't force you. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, Shaitan will speak truthfully. Although he's the worst of the creation, occasionally he tells the truth. One occasion be Yawm al-Qiyamah. وَقَالَ الشَّيْطَانُ لَمَّا قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَعَدَكُمْ وَعَدًا وَوَعَدْتُكُمْ فَأَخْلَفْتُكُمْ. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, when the whole of humanity is going to turn against the devil, he will say, لَمَّا قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ. It's all over, it's finished now. إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَعَدَكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised you. He gave you major promises. وَوَعَدْتُكُمْ الشَّيْطَانُ يَعِدُكُمُ الْفَقْرَ. I also promise you. Well, his promises is nothing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Shaitan will say, Allah promised you, and I promise you. فَأَخْلَفْتُكُمْ. But I broke my promise. But then he says, وَمَا كَانَ لِيَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْ سُلْطَانٍ إِلَّا أَنْ دَعَوْتُكُمْ فَاسْتَجَبْتُمْ. Don't blame me. فَلَا تَلْمُونِي وَلُومُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. So the only authority I had over you was to call you. When you're lying down in bed at Fajr time, and you're thinking it's cold to get up and so on, that's waswa of shaitan. But he didn't make you do it. You did it. You carried out the act. فَاسْتَجَبْتُمْ. He said, you answered my call. So it's you. So he said, فَلَا تَلُومُونِي وَلُومُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Don't blame me, blame yourself. Now somebody suggests an idea and you carry it out, it's your fault, not the person who suggested it. Shaitan suggests, but our nafs is the one that responds to it. And that's what ihsan is about. So training the nafs to bring it in line with everything that Allah and the Messenger ﷺ came with. As the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. None of you have complete faith until his desires, his nafs, is in line with what I came with. Only if you brought your nafs completely in line with revelation, that it doesn't fight, it doesn't rebel, it doesn't oppose. When it's time for salah, happily you'll come to salah. When it's time to read Quran, happily you'll read Quran. When it's time to fast, no issues whatsoever. When it's time to lower your gaze, you lower your gaze. When it's time to hold your tongue and not lie and backbite and stir trouble and slander, you hold your tongue. You hold your tongue, you do everything without any objection. It's not, you don't feel that your nafs is fighting you. Your nafs is pushing you towards that. And that's a nafs al-mutma'inna. وَالْعَفْمِ مِنَّا وَالْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ وَصَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَى سَيِّدِنَا مُحَمَّدٍ وَعَلَى آلِهِ وَصَحْبِهِ أَجْمَعِينَ.